very, very important to watch. Having said that, you know, as I mentioned, we do believe that technologies would be a very important roadmap for us to really define. And I must say that in the last 20 years, there are certain industries which have really done remarkably well in India in terms of reducing the energy intensity. While they have actually done quite a lot of work on using technologies, and cement industry is one of them I can call out here. We are probably the world's best producer in cement in terms of energy per ton. Same is the case with the steel industry. We have done remarkably well in terms of disrupting the energy footprint. Paper industry, I think in all these three industries, what we have seen is that they have really decoupled the energy intensity with the productivity. So I think there are great examples as well that India has done in terms of the industry. We've also seen the role of government and BEE in making sure EESL is doing remarkable work on lighting, and we have done great work in lighting in terms of reducing the energy requirements. But having said that, you know, today's topic is around how to get to net zero, and there is a defined target and a defined year that has been defined globally. I'm not too sure if India can be alienated by not making a choice, but having said that, you know, we would like to now listen to three eminent speakers who have, I'm sure, very interesting thoughts about how this can happen. We could make it happen. So what I would like to do now is I would like to call upon Mr. Mayandra Singhi. I think he's, you know, he's an iconic figure in terms of net zero journey as well. It's a very passionate subject for Mr. Mayandra Singhi, and I think he's done remarkable work in Dalmia Cement, and he's been probably the one company or the first company to really commit to net zero by 2040. That is an extremely bold move this company has made. And I think it's an inspiring commitment that they have made in terms of as an industry. So I think with those brief words, you know, I would like to invite you, Mr. Mayandra Singhi, to share your insights on what we could do here to get to race to net zero. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Ravi, for a great introduction. Great introduction both for my company as well as our country, India. I'm very happy that CII has taken up the subject of race to zero. You know, normally the race means only one person has to win. But here, race to zero is that when all participate, then all participants will win. And this is what COP26 agenda is. This is what I think the UN global agenda is, that let us all participate in race, don't leave X, Y, Z. Only thing is, there may be early participation, there may be late participation. So, Mr. Ravi, like you said about our company, you know, we were one of the first to even think of race in 2018, when nobody was thinking about net zero or by 2040, 2050. We just thought that having understood what the future would be, having understood that what role is being played by global cement sector, why not we take the leadership in innovating certain thoughts, innovating certain actions, and then when we understood that, then we could also comprehend in totality that it gels well for saving our future generation, in addition to the present generation also. You know, cement sector is known for emitting 7 to 8% of the total world's carbon emission. And if cement sector in totality comes forward and make certain actions which can lead to net zero, maybe by 2040, 2050, 2060, then it can play a very, very important role. With that objective in mind, and having also achieved the lowest carbon footprints in global cement sector in 2018, we decided that let us again push forward our philosophy of clean and green is profitable and sustainable. I do share this philosophy time and again because we all, particularly as a business people, as the industry people, have to break this myth that if you go for clean technologies, green technologies, that it will cost more. It may cost more initially, but we are the players who are working not for only quarter or year, but for decades. And with that philosophy, we decided that let us identify certain levers, which, if not today, tomorrow, or day after tomorrow, would be practical to implement, both with the availability of technology also and with the availability of mindset also. So our first and foremost challenge was the mindset. First, mindset internally, mindset externally. And in one of the last my interaction also, I shared that when in 2018 I shared this carbon negative roadmap of 2040 in San Francisco in climate summit. Good part was that people were not believing. People were laughing at us because how a hard to abate cement sector can think of carbon negative, not net zero also, carbon negative. But then we could understand that since already we are almost 55% of the world's carbon dioxide emission of the cement sector, it's possible to do it by A, B, C lever. And friends, let me share with you that for the year 2021, we had targeted at that time that our carbon emission would be 572 kg per ton of cement. And when this year, Ernst & Young audited our all parameters, KPIs, and now we have reported in our integrated reports, which includes sustainability report also, the figure has come to 492 kg per ton. So this is making us believe, this is making our team believe, this is making other cement companies believe that if you dream, you can actualize. So in fact, for pushing this philosophy, we used 5 processes. One, dramatize, which we did in 2018, and then vocalize. Same was done in 2018, 2019 also in UN Climate Action Summit. Then we started visualizing. We created even the roadmap also fully, as well we also created a drawing of a plant in which it is showing that it is using 100% renewable energy, it is using 100% non-fossil fuel, it is also using the carbon capture technology. So when all these things are done along with the energy efficiency, then it's a carbon negative. So with that visualization, we emotionalize all of the stakeholders, including our board, including our team member, and now we are in the process of actualization. So we are on the right roadmap, and the purpose of highlighting this is that we have to rope in all other industry members, just not only the cement sector, but all other industry members also, whether it's a steel, whether it's a aluminum, whether it's a paper, whether it's power sector. And when we all together will run for the race, then I think we will all be able to achieve zero. Normally, people may not find zero very exciting because everybody would like to go for 1, 2, 3, 8. But we know that zero was invented in India. Zero number was invented in India, and how each and every part of the world is working for zero. Hope everybody would agree with me, and Mr. Ravi must be knowing more than me that how zero got invented in India. So the point is that we all should commit for race to zero. We all should learn from each other, whether from A sector, B sector, whether from A country or B country, because we know that CO2, which is emitted in Delhi, is as bad as emitted in New York or in Paris or in Geneva or in St. Johannesburg or in Pakistan, anywhere. So the point is, all have the same duty to bring down CO2 emissions. And I'm very happy that now the Indian government took very important decision to put up 450 gigawatt of solar power by 2030, and which assures everyone, that whatever NDC we have committed as a country, we will be able to achieve. In fact, 4 days back, when Mr. John Kerry, UN President, Special Envoy on Climate, was speaking with Alliance of CEO in World Economic Forum meeting, he confirmed that if India is able to meet 450 gigawatt target, India would be meeting the NDC already committed. Of course, there would be a lot of pressure from other countries who are committed, that why a country like India should not commit for net zero. But of course, government will have to take their own decision. But good part is that Indian government is pursuing all industry companies or industrial companies to think about it, to work for it. But like Mr. Ravi, you also highlighted that India has one of the lowest per capita CO2 consumption. Indian economy has to grow. Indian people have to grow. So definitely Indian government should take a calibrated move so that the growth doesn't get compressed, but at the same time, the technology gets highlighted, gets elevated, like the way our Prime Minister Modi ji has highlighted that how one sun, one globe, and one grid, that gets done. So this is how I think we all should do. That whole globe should get connected. And last few points which I would like to make: one on the green finance. Now, Indian entrepreneurs have great ideas, but at the same time, the challenge with them is that there are no very specific innovation fund or technology fund in India who are supporting new technologies like carbon capture utilization or few other things. Whereas Mr. Mark might be fully aware, and you may be also, that in Europe, in US, now this this carbon capture and utilization technology is being supported in a big way. Whether it's a Sweden, whether it's a Norway, whether it's a UK, and then so this is what is required from the global friends, that how they support developing country like India for green finance. One of our project of carbon capture utilization has already been now approved by Asian Development Bank for feasibility study. So now what we are proposing, that to win the race, let us create some demonstration projects. So that is one. Secondly, we have to also create awareness about the carbon, how it will be impacting not only the industry, not only the government, but the individual. For that purpose, one, organization like CII, what role it can play, and secondly, how we can also sensitize people at large, and more particularly students, that in time to come, one has to work on bringing down CO2 in each and every action. And many of you might be aware that Indonesia has brought the bill to put up a carbon price of $5.5 or $5.50 per ton of CO2 emission. So this awareness we have to bring in India also. And thirdly, I would say in COP26 particularly, all countries should come together and implement Article 6 of the Paris Climate Agreement, which talks of international carbon trading. This is also one instrument by which various net zero or the CO2 reduction projects can be financed. So this would also be one of the very important area. And Dalmia Cement has very important role to play, because we have been identified as one of the 16 COP26 business leader. We have also been now made as a carbon pricing champion by World Bank Group. So we have to work on how carbon pricing should happen in the whole world, not on the India. And thirdly, we are also now committing for the first mover coalition, in which we are committing that whatever low carbon product would be available, whether it's steel, whether it's a vehicle, whether it's a compressor, whether it's a XYZ, we would be one of the company to go forward to buy it, even at the extra cost, even at the premium. And similarly, we also expect that all other sectors should also commit for this first mover coalition, in which it is being asked from the World Bank and Mr. John Kerry that please commit that whatever say low carbon product is available, your company would support. So this would create a demand for green product. And once green product demand is created, then definitely companies would be forced also to produce those products. We have seen this aspect in solar arena. And now even EESL is also working in a big way on this project also. So my last point is that one, I'm very happy that CII has chosen this subject, and Mr. Ravi is moderating in a very effective way. And thirdly, all should come together to push each and everyone together in the race. It is a different race. Thank you.
Ravi, you're on mute. Ravi, you're on mute, I think.
Oh, sorry. Thank you, Mr. Mayandra Singhi, and we'll come back to you in a moment once we have the other two speakers. Let me move on to Ram. Dr. Ram, Executive Director, India Engineering Center, Cummins, India. I think he has done a lot of pioneering work in his own area. He's leading more than 2,000 qualified engineers in different domain expertise around the Cummins technical organization. Dr. Ram, if I ask you, what according to you, I mean, based on the findings latest from IPCC, it is clear that greenhouse gas emissions are choking our planet and placing billions of people in danger. Yet we continue to develop and use oil and gas products such as diesel engines and generators. What are the energy impacts of the current fossil fuel consumption in India? And according to you, what are the fears about the current emission track we are on? Over to you, Mr. Ram.
Thank you, Ravi. When you actually start analyzing how greenhouse gas emissions are adding up, if you look at the transportation sector, coming straight into the point, right? Transportation sector emits approximately 11.9% of the overall greenhouse gases. But because it is much more visible, there are others that emit 73% and 24% and so on and so forth. But because it is very visible, the optics are, when you look at the tailpipe, you say that the transportation industry is the real culprit. But it's still important that even that 12% needs to be curbed and controlled. So when you look at what is being done in that segment, and you know that even talking just purely from an India standpoint, I leave alone other countries like the United States and the European Union. But if you look at just India, in the transportation segment, and I will just focus more on the heavy duty in a minute, we have got the Bharat 6 emissions regulations that have just been implemented as of last year. Despite the pandemic, the government went ahead and put that regulation into law, into effect. So with that, we are now on par with European tailpipe emissions of all sorts of transportation and mobility, right? And today, if you look at where I am in terms of greenhouse gas emissions coming out of diesels, it is hugely reduced from what it was even 4 or 5 years ago. Even the previous regulation, which was called Bharat 4, which was just few years ago. So we jumped Bharat 5, went straight into Bharat 6. So we wanted to protect our environment, particularly from greenhouse gases. But there are other things we also have reduced significantly from tailpipe emissions. But when you look at it that way, right, even for stationary power, starting next year, we'll have a new CPCB regulation that's going to significantly reduce our emissions. So when you look at it from that perspective, we are going into very, very low emissions. for a place like India, we have vehicles that run over 20, 30, 40, 50 years. And that's an issue. That's an issue because as these products wear out, as I'm in the engine business, so when engines wear out and if they are not maintained right, and if they are designed to previous emission regulations, they will continue to pollute. But as you know, now there are scrappage policies that are coming in, and that has now reached the smaller vehicles, but it's also going to come into heavy duty vehicles as well. With scrappage policies, we will be able to gradually wean off those bad actors, the high polluting bad actors. So I would say if I were a guessing man, I would say we would look a much better, cleaner country from at least from a transportation mobility segment over the next 5 to 10 years, because it takes that much to gradually wean off and retire the older vehicles, older gensets, etc. So that is one thing I want to bring to bear. I think Ravi, you were asking about what are some of the challenges with all these new emissions regulations and so on. So the challenges are, as Mahendra pointed out, the cost of doing all this, there is a cost to pay. Nothing is for free. But in the end, right, when you look at all the benefits are significant. We may spend in transportation and mobility, and we may save in healthcare. We may spend in transportation and mobility, but we may be saving in the amount of fuel that we use, right? So it brings in many advantages, because normally when you talk about reducing emissions, it also comes with better fuel economy and so on. So there are benefits to be had, and it takes some time to realize these emissions from a pocketbook standpoint and also from the overall environment and health standpoint. The other thing I also want to point out, coming from a so-called, I think you all think of us diesel industry as a dirty industry, but I just want to let you know that we are gearing up to get into more alternate ways of providing transportation and mobility. Cummins, for example, is a leader in both battery electric and fuel cells. We have taken some audacious projects from Cummins in India since my moving to India from the US, to work with government agencies like even railways. We have a couple of tenders to look at how can we electrify more, how can we go into fuel cell options, and these again are going to take some time. These could range anywhere from 5 years to the next 15 years. But that's the price it takes, right? Because you have about 2,000 locomotives flying, and I was at GE, so I just sold 1,100 locomotives before coming back to Cummins. So you've got to wean off these products, and whatever you do with fuel cells and electric in India today, we don't have electricity that's produced in a green manner. So today, at best, our electricity is black or gray, right? Or it is not really green. Tomorrow, right, in the future, when you go into greener modes of producing electricity, that's when your transportation mobility, whether it's on road or over the water or over rail tracks, and to some degree even in aviation, where I worked a little bit in my previous company. So we are all looking at how can we bring down those sorts of carbon footprint, greenhouse gases, etc. So it's a matter of time before we see, and it could be, I just say matter of time, but in one's lifetime, 10 years, 15 years to get there is not so bad, because we have done nothing. Cummins celebrates 102 years in the US and 60 years in India. So for 100 years there and 60 years here, we have been doing something that we only know about. But today we are switching gears, going into something more cleaner and newer technologies. So I would say 10, 15-year journey is not bad if we can leave behind a clean, pristine country and the world for our children and grandchildren. So I think more to come on this.
Thank you, Ram, and I'll come back to you in a moment. I have one more question for you. Moving on to Mark. Mark, you have been doing remarkable work on buildings and using digital and disrupting the energy envelope of buildings. But at the same time, I have a different question for you right now, Mark. This is about the biodiversity and its role in creating net zero. I live in Chennai, where when you go into the coastal area of Chennai, We used to have mango groves, and all the mango groves have today become colonies where the real estate developers have made merry out of the mango groves, actually. Sometimes I wonder how useful a mango grove is protecting the cyclone that comes into Chennai, because we are on the coastal area. So the question to you, Mark, is that how can restoration and conservation of biodiversity and the ecosystem contribute in mitigating the effects of global climate change and also help us in delivering the Paris agreements?
Thank you, Ravi, and thank you to the Confederation of Indian Industry for taking on this, hugely important debate around how we combat climate change as well as create more resilient economies. I'm going to come to your question in a minute, Ravi, but I'd like to start, if I may, just with some facts, and that comes from science. So what we know from science is that if we achieve a 2-degree temperature increase, we will have significant impacts on our lives. So just to put this in perspective, if we achieve a 2-degree temperature increase, we'll have approximately 2 billion people at risk of flooding. If we achieve a 1.5 C temperature increase, it comes down to about 700 million people. So a substantial difference. Additionally, if we achieve a 2-degree temperature increase in terms of heat waves, we'll have 3 times as many people suffering from those heat waves than a 1.5 C future. So now we start to understand that the new target has to be 1.5 C temperature increase from pre-industrial levels. Now you ask yourself the question, what does that mean? And really what it means is targeting net zero, which we talk about a lot. But again, let me give you some numbers and some figures so that you can understand the scale of this challenge. The first one is we need to halve our emissions in 10 years to be on track to achieve net zero. And in order to do that, we need to decrease our greenhouse gas emissions by 7% every year compound. And again, you may be thinking, okay, these are interesting numbers, but let's put something tangible around it. The first thing that I would say is last year, 2020, according to the International Energy Agency, our greenhouse gas emissions went down by a magical 7%. 7% is basically because of the contraction of our economies because of the pandemic. So now we understand, we actually know what it feels like to reduce by 7%. So the challenge for us now is actually we can clearly not afford to have a global pandemic every year for the next 9 just to halve. We have to fundamentally reconstruct how we do business. And this is why, for me, the race to zero is so fundamental. And really businesses are starting to understand this challenge, but really starting to grasp it as a business opportunity, which is exactly the right approach. So really coming around, Ravi, to your question, unfortunately, the tough news is we face a number of crises at the same time. And the other crises that we are facing is a biodiversity loss, which is what you're pointing to. So we've lost 60% of our biodiversity in 40 years. So WWF reports biannually, so every 2 years, we do a stock take on biodiversity, and the latest report indicates this number. So again, we are playing with fire here because we are removing the components of natural capital that support our lives and our economies. And these are things that we don't currently consider that we pay for them. We consider them to be free. So I'm talking about soil, I'm talking about forests, I'm talking about fresh water, as well as the things that you were mentioning, Ravi. So things like mangroves and things like coral reefs, these protect our natural environment and enable us to manage the fluxes in our climate. But the moment we remove those, we actually then face, as I said, a double whammy, because we have extreme conditions with no protection. So unfortunately, the challenge for us as a species now is to look at these two fundamental issues, so biodiversity loss and conserving our natural world. At the same time, we need to radically reduce our emissions. And this is why we call for companies to set what we call science-based targets, which I think many are familiar with on this call. And we need companies to set this at a 1.5C level. And they also need to think very clearly about how they engage, obviously, their scope 1, their scope 2, which is in their direct control, but also their scope 3 emissions, which are effectively up and downstream in the value chain. This is vital. So again, what I'm asking companies to do, the first thing is to set a meaningful climate target. Secondly, they need to fundamentally invest and that
Mark, we've lost you, I think. Vandana, do you know if he's logged off or something wrong with his?
Yes, sir. I'll check.
Yeah. Can I go back to Mr. Mayandra Singhi in the meantime? Mark, are you there?
He's back.
Mark, we lost you for half a second. You're muted, Mark. You're muted.
Can you hear me now?
Much better now. Go ahead. Go ahead.
So what we're asking companies to do is set a science-based target and then also look at these fundamental impacts across their own organization and across the value chain. The last thing that I would say is what has been echoed already, which is this is a fundamental business opportunity. So those companies who get and understand these challenges and actually see them as an opportunity will, I believe, be the most attractive to young consumers like Gen Zers, but also to investors. So these companies that actually take this on will thrive and survive in the future. Those that don't, I think, will wither on the vine. But thank you for that. Ravi, back to you.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. I guess it's just not companies who need science-based target. It's also countries who need science-based targets, I guess. But let me move back to, maybe I'll come to Mr. Mayandra Singhi after Ram. Ram, you are one of the technology leaders in the mobility area. What is your take on this new technology that India is kind of looking at green hydrogen as one of the economies in the future? What do you think? Is it a good idea to look at green hydrogen? Would it help India to accelerate its net zero? Your thoughts, please.
Yeah, it's fundamentally from a physics and technology standpoint, it's a great idea to go to green hydrogen, as long as it's green. Then it's a great idea. The many ways by which it's going to impact us is, number one, it's going to clean up the air for sure. It's also going to, perhaps, if that hydrogen is derived from renewable energy, it's also going to reduce our energy imports or fuel imports. So that is the biggest benefit. Since I also spent, some time in renewable energy elsewhere, particularly on 6 megawatt and higher wind turbines in my previous roles, I think it's a great opportunity. People talk about solar, people talk about wind sort of as the key players in the renewable market. So that's all great. I have personally, it might be a bad thing to say here, but I personally haven't given up on nuclear fission. I'm sorry, I'm the old school. I say it's a safety issue. It's not a technology, and physics are not the problem. So I would say when we do all of that, it obviously from transportation mobility pretty much brings us to net zero. But what we really need to be careful there is we need to find ways and means, and I'm talking about here specifically what I know today, technology-wise, fuel cells, and with some secondary battery power for peak shaving and limp home and those sorts of things. But both of those also bring challenges in terms of how do you dispose of spent material, right? So there's a lot of buzz, and there's a lot of not just mere verbal buzz, but also uh, actual actions being taken by companies, including ourselves, to look at how can I reclaim, reuse, and recycle. So we are into that, but there's going to be some small percentage of what needs to be somehow disposed of or returned back, right? So that's a problem we continue to toy with. We toyed with that problem 50 years ago to in terms of how do we refurbish a diesel engine. And we came pretty close to minimizing, almost bringing to zero what we scrap, right? And what we scrap, we used to reuse. So that's one challenge. If you're talking about total net zero, and you're not just looking at temperature increase, and you're not just looking at pollution in the air, you also have to look at what are you returning back to Mother Earth. So that is one area that we need to focus on. And the other area, as I started from the beginning, is that whatever energy we provide to uh, break down the water molecule needs to be truly green. And if that happens even in 20 years, let's say, because there is audacious goals that India will go to hydrogen power or renewable power, sorry, 25% by 2030. Today we are approximately about half that, approximately, give or take, depends on whose stats you're looking at. But if we really go to 25%, then we have arrived in India, and I think from there on things will take off. But as Mahendra pointed out, there's going to be some cost involved in all this. But in the end, as was pointed out by Mark, only the folks who do this will survive, like Cummins will survive another 100 or 200 years. Those who don't do it, they will, I don't know the analogy used, but I say they hit the dust. This is an American term, a cowboy term, that they will hit the dust if they don't completely go to more cleaner power sources. That's kind of my take, Ravi, if I answered your question.
Yeah, thank you, Ram. Mr. Mayandra Singhi, actually, I have a curious question for you. What actually motivated you and your organization to commit to EP 100 and RE 100?
Yes. The motivation is just one: do good, be good. That is one. Second one is be happy and make others happy. And third one, the same philosophy. Please implement the policy of clean and green, profitable and sustainable. Now, if I look at RE 100, 100% renewable power, it brings down my cost. It brings down my CO2 emission. And it brings down also the threat of higher carbon tax, higher carbon price. Similarly, on EP 100, when I bring down my energy cost or energy consumption, I bring down the cost. So the philosophy of my organization and mine is, since we are working in a commercial organization, today or tomorrow, it should make commercial sense also, but at the same time, it should make a sustainable sense also. And Mr. Ravi and others, while echoing what Mr. Ravi has said, Ram has said, and Mr. Mark has said, I would say we have also now committed for EV 100. And Dalmia Cement is the only company in the world who have committed for all three. We have already now started ordering for electric vehicles for operating in our mines. And slowly, we would make everything electrical. And in fact, Mr. Ravi, let me tell you that I have been driving electric car, that Reva electric car of India, since 2008 or 2009. So the point is, love for greenness is there because the color of dollar is also green. And at the same time, I also would like to highlight the ingredients for reaching to net zero, what Mr. Mark has said, is must. And that's why our company and many other companies in India have committed for science-based target, have committed for 1.5 degrees C target, have also committed for various such initiatives. And in fact, the philosophy of our organization has been, please try to commit in publicly also, so that you start working on it. And people like Mr. Ravi or organization like CII can ask you what you have done. Because we want the other outer organization also the credit how you are progressing. And the good part is that we have clear roadmap. And now the one important aspect which we have been discussing with the government is to create carbon sink by getting the waste land. And we would request Mr. Ravi to influence Tamil Nadu government also to get us waste land so that we can grow mangroves. We can also do a lot of forest bring down the CO2 emissions also, and at the same time, it will also promote biodiversity. In fact, we have already taken 2 projects in near Trichy, in Aryalur and Dalmiapuram on the biodiversity. So any green actions will go on motivating me and my organization Dalmia Cement and my promoter, Mr. Puneet Dalmia.
Thank you. That's very remarkable. We can see the passion in you, in terms of what you want to do and what you want to drive. Actually, that's really, really very, very interesting to see.
Thank you.
Mark, over to you now. Mark, when you look at India, we still have 600 million people living on agriculture, which is only 15% of the GDP. And when you look at after mobility and maybe after electricity in the urban cities, in terms of carbon emissions, methane is one of the biggest emitter in the agriculture industry. It is very often less spoken, but it's one of the biggest emitters as well in terms of CO2. Having said that, India's journey to net zero, it's not just enough for industry to act. We also see in India there is a very strong nexus between food, water, and energy. And when you look at the agriculture challenges that we have, and over 600 million people living on agriculture, this transformation to net zero is going to be a humongous task, given the fact that our peaking is going to be between 2035 and 2040. So a lot more needs to be done. If there are 3 recommendations that you would like to recommend what India should do for the agri sector, what would that be, Mark?
Tough and very big questions, Ravi. I think you're right. The agriculture and food sector is a huge contributor to greenhouse gas emissions. And you also pointed out, particularly around methane. Methane is a highly virulent and strong greenhouse gas. In fact, it has a global warming potential of between, I think it's 20 and 70 times that of carbon. So it is fundamentally a big problem for us. And therefore, we have to think about how do we, again, remodel, rethink, re-engineer agricultural practices. And this means looking at where the sources of these greenhouse gases are coming from. So if you look at the meat value chain is contributing, I think, between 12 and 15% of greenhouse gas emissions. So this is talking about beef, chicken, pork. And as we, as a global economy, demand more of these staple foods, we have to rethink how we produce them. So I would say that one thing that is emerging is, this idea of tech and tech coming into food. So we've seen the advent of Beyond Meat and Impossible Foods, who are making plant-based meat. And we're also seeing a variety of sort of other artificial meat manufacturers coming to the market, some of them attracting very high multiples of investment. So it does appear to me that the food industry will go through a massive disruption, because we will have to think about substitution of some of these foodstuffs. I think India, coming to a concrete example, has advantages in some senses, in that there is a high vegetarian population of people, which is actually thought to be far less environmentally impactful than other diets. So I think there is an advantage there. But clearly there is a lot of livestock in India, and this is the cause of the methane. So how do we manage that? And fundamentally, I don't have a specific answer. I do think we have to relook at our farming practices and how we manage soil is the key second thing that I would say. So we know that soil properly managed can be a carbon sink for us, as well as looking at how we do crop rotation. So this means coming back to farming practices that we used to do in the years that have gone by, which is if you rotate crops, you actually increase the amount of biodiversity within the fields, as opposed to monoculture, which is just, you know, producing as much as you can, as quickly as you can, potentially at lower quality as well. So I think there's a whole piece of work and thinking and action to be done in that space. Lastly, I would say that we need to educate consumers. So we need to start telling people and enthusing people about this new way of living and working and eating and consuming. So this is, again, a role for governments and businesses to shift how we actually make and purchase and consume food.
Yes, Mr. Mayandra Singh.
In fact, this is the point which I wanted to also highlight, which Mark has said about new way of living, new way of eating. And it has been now scientifically identified that non-vegetarian food emits most greenhouse gases than the vegetarian food. And one of the initiatives which now COP26 has taken is they have declared that all world leaders will be served only vegetarian food. That is one. And second, even the caterer of COP26 has said that I would not air freight any fruit or vegetable so that we can also contain the CO2 emissions in COP26. And one can imagine the people who personally physically attending maybe from 10,000 to 20,000, 30,000, no one knows now. So, in fact, Mr. Mark, if you have any idea, I would like to join and create this different way of living and eating in India and globally also. And we can finance this project, we can take it forward, this project. I am personally passionate about it because I am from Jain religion, and in Jain religion it talks about non-violence. And today I have come for that purpose only for 8 days, how to practice that and create that philosophy. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Ram, would you like to add any last comments from your side?
I think one of the things I wanted to add is there is one particular segment which I just touched on in transportation and mobility, but didn't talk a lot about, and that is the aviation industry. I shouldn't be talking because I'm a diesel engine guy, but I've spent some time in that industry, so I'll go ahead and talk about it. Even in the aviation industry, I think I know that there is a lot of work that has been pioneered to look at use of backup power, which is using electric energy, storage, battery, electric energy, specifically for takeoff. So when you take off from an airplane, for example, you spend a lot of energy on takeoff, but when you land, you're just transferring all that energy into friction and wasting it away, right? So there have been ways to capture that. There's also been ways of recharging these equipment when you're on the ground using renewable energy. So all that could help you to reduce the amount of jet fuel that you'll be using. Coasting or at altitude, just floating around is probably the lowest energy consumption for an aircraft. So there's a lot that we can do even in that industry. That industry doesn't get a lot of visibility because it's up in the sky. You only see those white smoke, but that is actually a trail of carbon-based emissions that can actually rain down. So these are things that we need to definitely look at. I also wanted to tout a little bit, like my colleague from Dalmia Cements, that Cummins is also looking at being net zero in our factories where we produce engines and components. We are looking at net zero. The way we do it, obviously, one is solar. We have also, in our close to our headquarters in Columbus, Indiana, have a wind farm that generates electricity to power the grid, which then powers our factories. So we are looking at that not only in the United States or in Europe, but we are also looking at that in India and China. So I just wanted to bring that. My own team is working on what we call as distributed energy. That means when solar is there, you can use solar. When wind is there, you can use wind, because these are not 24/7 like your electric grid that comes out of dirty raw feedstock like coal. But we want to look at all these combinations and work on that as well, both for our factories as well as someday we will be net positive and we might put that power back into the grid. So that is going to take another 20 to 30 years, because grids in India, if you look particularly, Europe has struggled with it. India has got very unstable grids. So if you try to tamper with that grid by putting in or taking out alternate forms of energy, the grid fails, right? We already have a very delicate grid and all of us know it. I have 4 power cuts in a day in Pune. So that is some balancing act that takes. So this is going to take time, but Ravi, I'm extremely optimistic about my country, that in the next 10 to 20 years, we are going to make huge inroads, because somebody said Gen Z, maybe it was you, Ravi, or it was Mark. Gen Z is not going to tolerate us leaving a dirty world behind or a dirty country behind for them. So with that, I just want to say thank you to you, Ravi, and the panelists as well.
Yeah, thank you, Ram. I think we are almost at the end of the hour. Let me just kind of sum up this very enthralling session. Great insights. Like Mr. Mayandra Singhi, we are also a company that is committed to EV 100, EP 100, RV 100. We are looking at science-based targets. We operated last year 7 months on solar. We have disrupted our water, and we're looking at getting to carbon neutrality in our campus before 2028. So we have even more ambitious target. But I think one thing that we are banking heavily on is technology and using technology. And as Ram, you rightly mentioned, I think Cummins has shown the way for 100 years and in globally and 60 years. So I think technology is going to be a very important role to raise zero. That's one clear conclusion that emerged from our conversation. Second, I think listening to Mr. Mayandra Singhi, I think mindset and leadership is very, very important in this transition to raise zero. I truly believe, if companies like Dalmia are committed to this, I think there are a lot more companies can emulate what the cement industry has achieved. Even though the path to net zero could be very different in cement, to very different in steel, to very different in mobility, but I think the sheer science-based targets which Mark spoke about becomes very important for the journey of each and every industry to get to the net zero journey. I think Mark touched about a very important aspect of the need of biodiversity, how to regenerate, reimagine biodiversity. That's a very, very important thing. And I think the other thing that emerged from the conversation also was that net zero alone cannot limit or stop climate change, because we also have the agriculture with us, we have the industry with us. We also need to look at the consumption patterns. There was we alluded to vegetarian, non-vegetarian, but we also export rice. When we export rice, we export fresh water. When you export shrimp, you export fresh water. So it's a kind of a very controversial subject as well. But I think we need to look at radically overhauling a lot of our habits, and carrying the 1.2 billion people along with us in this journey is going to be very crucial. So I think with those words, Vandana, I think we are almost at the end of the hour. So I think all of us believe race to net zero. I think as India, we can do it. It requires a lot of leadership, change in mindset, a lot more technology, and a lot more innovation. And I think we can get there. So on that optimistic note, I would kind of thank all the panelists. It was very passionate to hear each one of you in your own areas. You have done remarkable work, and thank you for giving me an opportunity to be part of this elite panel and also talk about net zero. So, Vandana, we are almost at the end of the hour, and I'll hand it back to CII if you have anything more to inform or kind of we are into the session at the moment. Thank you very much, everybody, and namaskar. And Mark, great catching up with you, and Ram as well as Mayandra Singhi. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're very well led, well in time.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, that's also important in race to net zero, right? Vandana, anything else is needed from our side?
No, sir.
Thank you very much, everybody, and have a great day. Have a great weekend. Bye-bye.
And Mr. Ram, let me get in touch with you so that you can electrify our cement process.
I'll be very happy to. Thank you.
We'll contact you, and Mark, you are always there.
Thanks, Ram. Look forward to seeing in touch with all of you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks.